We are experiencing, as all of you know, a very intense and devastating time in Southern California with the fires. And um, so I'm happy that we can be here to practice together. And I also want to talk about the topic of compassion because I think this is a response that this is actually a practice that we can do when we know there is a lot of suffering going on, as this is happening right now. And the suffering may be, you may be directly impacted. There's enormous loss going on right now, as we all know. You may be very impacted through dear ones, friends, family. And so sometimes what happens is or you may just feel, you just may be like, oh, look what's happening. Look what I'm seeing in the news. And it's just overwhelming and deeply unsettling. And so what tends to happen is the response is, I'm overwhelmed, or I try not to think about it because it's too much, or I feel compassion, but what does that really mean? So I want to look at this compassion and talk about practices that we can do that I think are really beneficial in this time. It's what I'm trying to do. But compassion is kind of complex. It's not straightforward, and we'll get at why and what that means. Um, so compassion is an open-hearted feeling meeting suffering. So if you've done loving kindness practice, which a lot of us have done, it's sort of like it's just cultivating an open heart. So compassion is cultivating an open heart in relation to suffering, which is trickier. It's harder. You'll see what I mean as I talk about it. The compassion is our heart being moved in response to pain. And so someone we know, or ourselves, or someone we love, or someone we've read about, or what we know about is experiencing pain or suffering, and our heart goes, oh, I hope their suffering is alleviated. So it's like this desire to alleviate suffering. And that's a very beautiful response. It's a beautiful response for our heart to go, oh, you are suffering. How can I help you? How can I be there for you? So as opposed to those other things that I mentioned, like, I don't want to deal with this, stick my head in the sand, someone else can handle it, or I'm scared, or I'm overwhelmed. Suffering, what we can do is deliberately cultivate compassion as a kind of response to what's happening right now, wide scale suffering in California, and of course everywhere else where there's stuff going on. It's not the only place. So we've all had compassion. You've all had moments of compassion, whether it's your kid is sick and you just, oh no, or you see an animal that's hurt, or someone you love is in pain. I mean, compassion is a very natural and easy response to have in some ways, because we just it's part of being human. We feel compassion. So just take a moment, because compassion is a very embodied, felt sense. So let's just take a moment to, if you want to close your eyes, you can, but just think of a time, and could be right now, when you think about what's happening with the fires, but maybe it could be just when your child was sick, or your partner was hurting for some reason. Just take a moment to reflect on what they were feeling, or what you're imagining people are feeling. And take a breath. And as you think about that, what happens inside your body, your mind, your system? What happens? There might be a sense of, oh, this hurts. Oh no, worry. See if you can just sort of offer a little care to them. Like, you might say these words: may your suffering be alleviated. May you be free from your pain and your suffering. Take a breath. And as you say some words like that, notice how that feels inside. Okay. If your eyes are closed, you can open them. Now just take a moment if you want to put into the chat when you repeated, when you just said for 1 second, any kind of words, what did you notice? Anything did you notice in your body, in your heart? Did it feel like compassion or did it feel like overwhelm? Remember, these can get really close to each other. What did you feel or notice? And just take a moment. Warm, softening. I felt like maybe it was actually helping. A few responses here. I felt like I had something useful to do other than stand there and panicking. Yeah, there you go. Some love, some tension, like a bubble had burst in a good way, an opening, a rising in my heart, release, making a connection, more able to face the other person's pain and be with it. Okay, there's some beautiful things coming in. I'm going to pause right now and give back tenderness. I might recall out a few more. So what we did was pretty much what we're going to focus on. I'm going to get into it in more depth, but there was a contact made with suffering, and there might have been an initial first response like, oh no, what do I do? This is awful. But then the second response was compassion, that desire to alleviate the suffering. And as someone pointed out, doing that felt like you were actually doing something as they wrote, rather than standing there and panicking. So that's the power of compassion as a practice. And we'll do it. We're going to do it as a specific practice. I'm going to teach it to you in a little while, but let's talk a bit more about it, because one of the things that happens, as I said, is when we meet suffering, when we make contact with suffering, we might have compassion, but we also might not have compassion. We might have something that kind of masquerades as compassion, like pity. Pity is not compassion, because with pity, there's a feeling of like dislike or fear, right? Or there's some aversion, there's some like negative emotion connected there. So it's pity is not compassion. There's usually like a dislike or scared of it or something. And then there's other things that are not, pity is like close to compassion, but then there's things that are the opposite of compassion we might feel. So we think about what's happening right now and with where people are suffering, let's say with the fires, and we feel terror, or we feel anger, or we feel some other indifference, right? Those are not close to it. They're sort of far from it, but they're very natural responses that people have. So what we can learn to do is exactly what we did in that little tiny meditation, is we can make contact with the suffering in a very, just in our mind. And then rather than sit in the fear and the worry and the pity and we can shift our mind a little bit to move towards compassionate thoughts, which then opens up our heart. And that's like a very beautiful thing to do. And we'll talk in a moment whether it actually does anything or not, but we'll get there. So let's just learn a little bit more about compassion. So as I said, it begins with this acknowledgement of suffering, right? It begins with the recognition that someone is suffering. So right now, we know there's a enormous amount of suffering going on. And so we have a lot to work with, whether it's affecting us personally or people we love or just in general. It's that acknowledgement of suffering that's really important to key off the compassion, right? Because if you don't acknowledge it, how do you feel compassion, right? You're just like, oh yeah, people are suffering, whatever, right? That is not going to be a precursor to compassion. That's just going to be a precursor to indifference or avoidance, right? So there's something very powerful in being able to say, yes, suffering is happening. There is suffering in the world, right? That's like, it's very powerful because I think for a lot of us, for instance, like dominant culture is like, we're not supposed to acknowledge suffering. Suffering is bad. Everything is good all the time, right? Which is obviously not true. Okay, so the first part is acknowledging the suffering. The second is letting it in. So acknowledging it's existing and then letting it in, but letting it in appropriately. Okay, so this is really, really key. If you let it in, and what I mean by letting it in is like, just like I had you do, you made contact, you noticed what you were feeling, or oh no, or my heart is breaking, whatever it is. But you you sit with that for a moment to take in the truth of the suffering. And it it might be like sting or hurt or be a little overwhelming. So we want to play with how much we're willing to take in. So for instance, there are some of us that, I mean, this is just a very interesting thing I've noticed over the years, that there are some of us who we kind of like we tend towards avoiding difficult emotions, and so we probably can, if we take in we need to maybe take in more to feel the impetus to compassion. And then there are others who like over empathize, right? People who are, you may be one of those, like the slightest, you see a dog who's sick and you're just like, oh, you're overwhelmed, right? So finding that good balance where you're taking it in enough to make an impact in your being, but you're not overwhelming yourself. And that's actually tricky, right? It's tricky to find that place. And we don't have to get too, like over intellectualizing about it, because you can kind of play with the feeling. Like you might know who you are and where you stand on that. And so in a more general sense, are you a person who, if you are a person who tends to avoid suffering, maybe doing these compassion practices can increase your ability to face suffering and to bring in compassion. And if you're a person who is overwhelmed, you need to be really careful how much media you take in. You need to be really careful. You maybe how are you watching the news? I mean, I noticed today I just had the images on the television on in the background, and at a certain point I just went, oh no, 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 gotta stop, cannot do that anymore. Or the practice of equanimity, which a lot of are very familiar with, where it's, cultivating this ability to be with things as they are. That is a very powerful practice for people who tend to go into overwhelm. So just going back to what I was saying, the steps to compassion are acknowledging it's there, allowing it to impact you, taking it in, but doing it in right relationship. So you don't overwhelm yourself. If you overwhelm yourself, you're not going to feel compassion. You're going to feel overwhelm. If you stay too distant, you're not going to feel compassion. You're going to feel indifference. So we'll play with this in a little bit. And I actually think you all did it, because based on what I saw with the comments, we did in like 10 seconds. People found a place where they can find their doorway into compassion. And so I'm speaking, in some ways about like dealing with it in life. It's also really important that we have compassion for ourselves. So I know that it's, for some of us, it can feel selfish. Like, well, if I'm wanting to practice compassion, but I want to practice compassion for everybody, because there's so much suffering in the world, and I want to have a big open heart and be really compassionate. If we cannot be compassionate for ourselves, it's really hard to be compassionate to anyone else. So when we do this practice, we're going to do the practice in a little bit, you may discover that the person you want to send compassion to is you. And if that's the case, go for it. It's not selfish. It's 100% not selfish. If you, so the third, so, okay, so We start by making contact, we then let it in. And as it comes into us, as it impacts us, then we offer words of compassion. Now, I just want to do a little side thing for people who are having a hard time having compassion. And this is probably not the case with the situation with the fires because we know what's going on, but sometimes it's hard. We're in a situation, a different situation where it's hard to have compassion. So one of my favorite things to work with when it's hard to have compassion is the quote I like to say, when I can't be compassionate, what is it I don't understand? When I can't be compassionate, what is it I don't understand? And this is for, not obviously such life or death situations here, but a person that you're working with that you've had a hard time having compassion with, or I don't know, politicians, or having, something with your partner or your children or your parents or wherever. Sometimes if we can find the doorway into why what we don't understand about them, it opens the door to compassion. Because compassion is, when there's understanding, there's often a natural arising of compassion. So here we are dealing with a situation in Los Angeles where it's hard. It would be very hard not to understand what was going on, right? We just know it's absolutely horrible. And our hearts go, oh. And so more probably the issue with this one is getting overwhelmed, right? And finding that like right relationship. But when it's a difficult situation, it's hard to be compassionate. When we break through into understanding, compassion arises. And sometimes it takes like a personalization of it or understanding of it. So many years ago, I was driving down the road. I was trying to get somewhere. I was very late, and there was a person blocking a car blocking traffic. And I remember getting really pissed off because I was late and there were like 5 cars ahead of me and they were trying to get through an intersection and no one was moving. And as I creeped up, I saw that there was a person at the intersection who was in the middle lane trying to make a left-hand turn. And I immediately went, what a jerk. Who is this idiot? My mind is just like, how could you be so stupid? You can't make a left-hand turn from the middle lane, blah, 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 right? Superior, angry. Blah. Anyway, I inched up, and I looked over at the car, and it was my friend Sue. And then suddenly I felt all this compassion. I thought, oh, poor Sue, she can't make a left-hand turn. She's stuck in the middle lane. It was the shift in understanding, right, that came because it stopped being some impersonal, awful person that's doing something to me, but someone I loved. So these are kind of tools for working with when compassion is harder to reach than, say, what we're dealing with now. Longfellow wrote, if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each person's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. So we make contact by acknowledging it. We acknowledge, then we make contact. We might need to shift our hearts and minds a little in terms of understanding. But then the compassion begins to arise, and that compassion arising is in some way an action itself. It is an action. The heart moving towards compassion is an action because compassion involves action, but action doesn't have to be a physical thing. It could be a movement of the heart and the well wishes that you'll see are part of the practice. So compassion, it's interesting in Thai language, in the language of Thailand, compassion is a verb and a noun. So it's both. So I think Thich Nhat Hanh used to say this a lot. He used to say, compassion is a verb. So, and one of his famous quotes is, once there is seeing, there must be acting, for what is the use of just seeing? Once there is seeing, there must be acting. So we want to then harness what arises, and it could be working with our own minds to transform and to bring in compassion, or it could be something like a physical action. So I know a lot of incredible people who have been offering their homes, who've been helping the people who've lost their homes and saying, come stay with me, come, that's like a very simple, easily heartfelt action. We've offered that in my family to our friends. But compassionate acts can be anything. They can be uh, very simple things. They can be just showing up and giving someone your presence and listening. It can be doing these meditative practices. It could be service. It could be financial. It could be tremendous acts of courage in the face of hardship. And I think, again, I mentioned this earlier, but I think so much about the incredible goodness of the firefighters and first responders right now, who are like, it is a practice, it is a profession of compassion in a way. And of course, there may be other things there. I don't know much about that, but it's just like we want to, it helps my heart open when I think about how much goodness these people are, what they're doing, what they're braving to help others. It's this tremendously generous and compassionate act. And all of them are good. So not judging ourselves because we're supposed to be one place or another. Just wherever you are is where you are, and you just work on it, and you can see what happens. And sometimes you want to be compassionate and all you're feeling is overwhelm, and that's where you are. And then can you be compassionate with yourself? And sometimes, you're watching the news, you're like, oh, I've had enough, boom. Or I'm not feeling compassion, I'm feeling fear. Okay, bring a little kindness to yourself right now. So let's talk about the compassion practice, which we're going to do in a moment. So we use phrases, we do these steps. We bring something to mind. We could start with ourselves. We could start with others. We start with where it's easy. You bring someone to mind. You think about how they're suffering. You make contact in a very gentle way, like allowing it to impact you. Notice what you're feeling when you've allowed it to impact you. Pause, breathe, and then imagine sending out compassion. And you can use phrases. I'm going to give you a lot of phrases. And in fact, I'll just stick them into the chat so you'll have them, but I'll say them. And they're phrases like, may you be free from your pain and your sorrow. May you be free from suffering. I care about your suffering. May your suffering be alleviated. May it be ease. And then there's so many more. You can do your own variations. May you find ease in your heart. May you come to more acceptance of your pain or sorrow. May you feel, I said that, when I care about your suffering, I'm with you in this. Right. So there's that, you can vary it, but it's these words of compassion that we then feel into also, like, oh, right, as I say these words, I'm not panicking so much. I'm just sending this out, sending out the love. Now, does it work? Right? Does it work if we send it? I don't know. I mean, I like to think that it works. I like to think there's something really important, that we are sending out compassion rather than fear and worry. There was a lot of research done over the years around prayer, the impact of prayer. And my understanding of it is it's pretty inconclusive. People like to think that it's really, really conclusive. It actually is not. At least that's my latest. I haven't looked at it like recently, but we do know what it's like to be in the presence of someone who is sending out compassion rather than sending out fear, rather than sending out like terror, worry, pity, avoidance, right? It feels really good to feel the presence of compassion. Yeah. So this is what and we know that it impacts us, right? That's the thing. It impacts us. And so that's totally powerful and important. So lastly, I'll say that compassion is a practice. Compassion takes work. It's a tricky practice. It's not like, I don't know, it's a little harder for people than like loving kindness practice because it involves suffering and facing suffering and feeling into suffering and letting that transform is a bit harder, but it's an incredibly powerful practice. And as we practice it, it starts to become more and more our default setting. It becomes more of our response rather than pity, fear, anger, worry, anxiety. But it's like, oh, the response is compassion. It's so beautiful. And we start to see that happening. Okay, so I'm gonna pause here and we're gonna do that practice, as you can imagine, in a few minutes, but I just wanted to see if there are any questions about anything I said before we go into the practice. So someone was asking the difference between loving kindness versus compassion and yeah, okay, so and then definition of and then equanimity. Okay. In traditional Buddhism, there's something called the four immeasurables, or sometimes they're called the Brahma Viharas, meaning heavenly abodes, beautiful states of the heart and mind, immeasurable qualities, qualities that are boundless, that are hard to develop, and not hard to develop, but just like, I don't know why I said hard. They're not hard. They just take some time and work. So one is loving kindness. The second is compassion. The third is empathetic joy or appreciative joy, and the fourth is equanimity. And they are variations on a theme, at least the first three, but but they are different than each other. So I mentioned a little bit, but loving kindness is an opening of the heart. Compassion is an opening of the heart in relation to suffering. So with loving kindness, we might be saying things like, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be free. With the compassion practice, we're saying, may you be free from your sorrow, may you be free from your suffering, right? It's a little different than may you just generally be happy. Got it? And then empathetic joy or appreciative joy is, may your happiness and good fortune continue. So it's an open heart with people's good fortune. So it's the opposite of compassion. It's the opposite. It's suffering versus with their good fortune. So that's the third one. And then the fourth one is equanimity. And equanimity is just a mind that it can be at ease with whatever is happening. So it's different practice, but it's connected because it's one of these four immeasurables or divine abodes. Okay. All right, shall we do the practice? I think how Los Angeles needs it right now. It needs our our compassion. Okay. So settle back and get comfortable. It's very hard to generate any of these positive qualities of the heart if we are not feeling good, right? If your body is aching, it's hard to send compassion to anybody else. So just maybe get comfortable, find some ease. You can close your eyes, you can keep them open if you're open, looking downward so you don't get too distracted, but really it's up to you. And let's begin with a few breaths, noticing your breath in your body. Taking some time to just get present again. So to start the compassion practice, let's bring to mind a person you know who might be suffering, but don't go first to the hardest person. Like go to someone that actually is kind of easy to feel compassion for, someone you felt compassion for in the past. And you can go to like the larger, suffering that's happening. But I would just recommend, like, just to get started on the practice, pick someone fairly easy. It's not too complicated, who is suffering. And it could be an animal too. So just, it might be the person you thought of earlier when we did the meditation. So just bring them to mind. And have a sense of them here with you. And you might imagine, like, where do you imagine them? If they're maybe a child, you want them on your lap, or they're standing behind you or in front of you, or just imagine you might see, sense, feel. Take a breath. Be soft here. And now ruminate or think about. Normally we don't ruminate when we do mindfulness practice, but in this practice you're allowed to think about things. So just think about what is causing them sorrow, what is causing them suffering. And as you think about it, notice how that feels as you think about the ways they're suffering. And it's okay if your first response is, ouch, that hurts, or oh no, or I'm worried about them, or, any of those things. So just take a moment to reflect on how they're suffering. And then notice what's happening in your body and heart as you let that in. Take a breath. And so you've acknowledged it, and now you've made some contact with it. And now let's try these words and see what happens as you say these phrases. We'll start with the simple ones. May you be free from your pain and your sorrow. May you be free from your suffering. So you can repeat my words, or you might have your own words, or you might not want to use words. You might actually just have a feeling of compassion you want to send. May you be free from your pain and your sorrow. May you be free from your suffering. And breathe and notice what's happening in your body. And emotions may come, just allowing whatever is here to be here. And here's some other language. I care about your suffering. I care about your suffering. May your suffering be eased. May you find peace. I'm with you. I'm here with you. And notice what's happening inside you as you do that. And whatever's happening, whether it's compassion or something else, just let yourself be where you are. It is not like you're not supposed to have a perfect response to this. We're just playing with it. We're practicing with it. Okay. And this is a hard practice. So just being with it, breathing, and noticing if you could use a little compassion right now. Noticing if you could use a little compassion. If that's the case, breathe in and see if you can take in some compassion. And some people like to put their hand on their chest or on their belly or both. You can or cannot. And you might imagine that this person you were thinking of or animal is sending it back to you. May you be free from your pain and your sorrow. May you be free from your suffering. Taking it in, taking it in, breathing, taking in just the right amount so you don't get overwhelmed. If it starts to get too much, you can notice your hands, notice your feet, listen to the sounds. May my suffering be alleviated. May I be at ease. Taking a breath, knowing at any point in the meditation, you can always come back to sending it to yourself. Inhaling, exhaling. So you can keep going here. You might have another person or animal you want to send compassion to. So pick someone else, or maybe it's a group of people, family, or maybe it's people in your neighborhood, or don't go too hard yet. Just go for something that you want to send compassion to. And as you bring them to mind, what is the suffering? Just notice as you reflect. And notice the immediate reaction, yuck, or I'm scared, or maybe your reaction is compassion. We don't know, but just notice it and breathe. And then may you be free from your pain and your sorrow. May you be free from your suffering. And you might have images, or you might imagine them really happy, or you might imagine that their suffering is eased. And sometimes we do this with the breath. As we breathe out, we breathe out compassion. As we breathe in, we just make contact, very gentle contact, and then we breathe out. May you know I'm here with you. May your suffering be eased. So as you do this practice, you can do it for whoever you want to do it for. So for the next part, if you want to pick a harder person, you can. If you want to keep going with whoever you're going. If you're working with a harder person, you might ask yourself, what am I having a hard time understanding? What is it I don't understand? And that might impact it. If you want to keep going where it's easy, keep going there. If you want to send it to yourself, let's do it for just a few minutes. May you be free from your pain and your sorrow. May you be free from your suffering. I care about your suffering. I'm with you. And then notice what happens as you say these words of compassion, or as you let the flow of compassionate energy or feeling come into you. Breathing and sensing. And also letting yourself be wherever you are. If you're not feeling compassion, that's okay. It's totally normal for whatever I'm feeling right now. May I hold this too with compassion and kindness, or just ease. May I hold this with awareness. And now, lastly, what I'd like us to do is, as a whole group together, and whoever is listening in the future, let us send compassion out to all the people who've been affected by the fires in LA. So bring them to mind, just acknowledge, and remember, be gentle with yourself and how much you bring to mind. You don't want to overwhelm yourself. Just maybe think of one person who you know has been impacted, or maybe think about some area that you care about, or just whatever comes to mind. Or we can think about the animals who are impacted. And notice how it feels to let in that suffering, to acknowledge and then just to let it in. And even if your response is, this is really scary or sad or overwhelming, it's okay. That's a natural, normal response. And breathe. Let yourself be where you are. And then let's offer some words. May be free from your pain and your sorrow and your loss. May you be free from your suffering. As you exhale, or as you want to do it, just imagining that compassion coming from you. I'm here for you. I care about this suffering. May the healing begin in your life. Whatever words you want to say those words and notice the impact in your body and mind as you send these words out. Breathing. And let's all kind of imagine that the impact of all 100 of us, or however many there are, that's sending this out, that's making an impact. It's touching the people, it's transforming them. You can imagine them having a moment of ease, of breath. And if there's something that occurs to you in your mind that you want to do about this or about anyone you've done in this practice, that you've thought about in this practice, take note of that. Just noticing where you are, letting yourself be in this field of compassion that we are working on. Doesn't have to be here perfectly. Let's now come back to our own bodies, hearts, and minds, and notice what's here. Breathing, sensing. And you can say, just notice what's here. And it might be that you're feeling compassion, it might not be. But you can say, for whatever it is I'm feeling right now, may I hold this too with awareness and kindness. And I be there for myself too. Breathing, sensing. Let's feel our feet on the ground. Feel the connection to the earth. Connection to each other all around the world. Holding a space of compassion in the midst of suffering. When you're ready, you can take a breath and then open your eyes or end the meditation. Okay. Thank you for your practice. I want to believe that it's making a difference, certainly making a difference in how I'm feeling as I teach these practices and as I send them out for myself. I didn't even realize I was in the dark. Hold on. One sec. So we just have a little bit of time. Any questions about the practice, about doing it, or anything that arose as you did that practice? Not. We will, I'll give it a little more time. Yeah, I see Evelyn. Yeah. Oh, it can't unmute. Serena, can you help Evelyn unmute?
Right now.
How's that?
Yeah.
So I found myself really feeling like the words around specifically like alleviating suffering to feel quite hollow in the face of so much suffering. Like in the sense of like, how can I possibly be wishing this be alleviated when it feels inevitable? Um, and so I guess my question, the thing that came up for me is, how much do you think the practice is about the open-hearted meeting of compassion versus how much of it is specifically the desire for it to be alleviated, or is that desire kind of inherent in that moment of meeting?
I mean, it's a great question, Evelyn. I think it's some combo is my guess. It's like we're working on opening the heart. We're meeting it the best we can and we're developing it. So it becomes a practice that we're cultivating, and it's going to shift and change over time if you take this on as a practice, a commitment to this practice. But what I will say is play with the words so that you find the one that makes sense. Because may the suffering, I mean, the suffering is enormous. So just, oh, may your suffering stop. Oh, like it does sound a little like maybe too, I don't know what the word is, like unrealistic or something, but maybe it is just something simple like, may my heart be filled with compassion, may I open to your suffering, or something really simple, because that's all we can do right now. It's unfathomable what is happening right now. And so our response, it's not going to be like some quick little thing, but we'll work with it.
I found myself getting very specific and concrete in the like, may you bear this horror, may you know, make it through this day. That kind of, really like in the realm of possible, but
Great.
still in the realm of alleviating suffering, I guess. Now I'm thinking about it.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. Listen into all of you. The suggestion when we do this practice is really to listen to yourself and see what emerges and trust that, which is just what Evelyn did. Yeah. Thanks. I'm gonna just look at, there were a couple of comments, and then I'm gonna just have a couple of announcements. So let me see. I couldn't help but think the person I was sending compassion to would say, "Don't feel sorry for me." Possibly, but oops, is that our problem? You know what I mean? Sorry, I didn't mean to say it in a nasty way. That's not my problem. We do this practice and we don't know necessarily what the results are, and maybe they don't want us to feel sorry for them. But I think it's okay to do it anyway. And if we get some feedback from someone like, don't do that, then we might shift the way we do the practice, and that's okay. Someone was saying, let's hope this is alleviating suffering. And then iPhone said, I just started bawling. I don't know if that's a good response, but I think it helped me. Oh yeah. I think it says it's Renee. Having emotions come when we do this practice is normal, it's natural. And if it sometimes it's a way of evoking feelings that we might not have been ready or willing to feel, but it comes up in the meditation. And so we want to really trust that. So it is helpful. Yeah. And just use your practice, use your mindfulness practice with it, with the bawling, like holding yourself with awareness and compassion as that happens. But I think it's quite healing, actually. I don't know how to avoid falling into despair. Any wisdom or guidance would be welcome. Yeah. Annalise said I would say with this, I mean, it is very despairing situation. It is. And of course, it's not just this one. There's like so much going on in the world too. And who knows what's in our lives as well. My recommendation would be there's a meditation on equanimity, which I did about a month or two ago. That's about kind of being with things as they are. And it can build a sense of stability and solidity in our mind that can help avoid the despair, and to also practice it. Start. So that's one thing. So take a look at that meditation. It's on our UCLA Mindful app on equanimity. And then also it sounds like, remember I talked about people of different varying degrees, so some of us get overwhelmed really easily. So back off and just, if you're doing the meditation, just think about things a tiny bit, like just like a fingernail of connecting with the suffering, and a lot of holding space for it and bringing in that equanimity practice. Okay, and then I understand the feeling of your heart being touched by another's suffering. I felt it this morning when I learned a very special person's home in Pali was destroyed. Yeah. Yeah, we're all resonating with each other. One of the things about compassion is rooted in interdependence, that we are not separate from each other. And there's compassion practices that you can do where you connect with this, where people are suffering, and you recognize that we're all suffering in different ways. So that's a whole thing. Okay, so sometimes acknowledging a person's suffering is enough to alleviate it to some extent. Yeah, at least the practice allows us to put a stop to listening to the news. There you go. It gives you something else to do than doom scroll. How about that? All right, everyone, I will see you, and we'll just keep doing. When you go into the despair and the overwhelm, try the compassion practice, or try loving kindness, or try equanimity. They're all so helpful in these times. Okay.